We are in the third Sunday of Lent. Lent is a season of repentance and renewal and reflection. Renewal often happens in the wilderness, right? Jesus begins the season of Lent in the wilderness. He's sent by the Spirit of God to be tempted by the devil in the wilderness. And oftentimes we're tempted to think that wilderness, like when we're sent into the wilderness, that that's somehow God's punishment for us. And we even heard that in the psalm that we read together this morning, right? God did not appreciate the complaints of Israel when they were asking for water in the wilderness. And after so much complaining and Moses trying to do what used to work instead of what God was asking him to do now, God then invited Israel to spend more time in the wilderness. And yes, like we can interpret that as punishment, but we can also see it as an invitation from God to slow down, to open up our ears, to open up our hearts, to be prepared for the future that God has for us. Sometimes God, let me back that up for just a second. God knows God's future for us, right? God's future is what God is always inviting us into, and it's always good. But sometimes we're not ready. We're not ready for God's good future. And so God invites us to slow down. In fact, the prophets, especially the prophets Hosea and Habakkuk, they talk about the wilderness as a place that God calls Israel back into to be wooed by God, right? It's not, I'm sending you out there because you've been bad and I'm angry at you. It's, I'm calling you back out here. I need you to listen. I need to strip away the distractions. I need to get you away from the things that have tempted you, the idols that have led you into false devotion to false gods, that have caused you to ignore my commandments. And my commandments are good and just and righteousness. And because you have strayed from me and my heart from you, now you are doing injustice. You are acting in ways that are unrighteous. Having forgot to love God, they are no longer loving their neighbor. If you listen to the words of the prophet, so often the connection between worshiping false gods, worshiping idols, worshiping the gods of other nations, and those other nations, right? Those are powerful nations. Those are war-making nations. Those are nations that come in and enslave the people that they've captured. And so it should not surprise us that when Israel chases after their gods, that they start acting like those people, making war and enslaving. They've forgotten the love of God, which has led them away from loving their neighbor as themselves. So God invites us into the wilderness in Lent, not because we've been bad, not because we can earn God's attention or favor, not because we can store up merit with God or anything like that. He invites us into a place of repentance, letting go of those things that have drawn us away from the love of God. He's invited us into a time of reflection, and he's invited us into a time of renewal. Esau McCauley, who teaches New Testament at Wheaton College and has a podcast with Bob the Tomato, as well as is a columnist for the New York Times. He's written in his little book about Lent, he says, "We follow Jesus because he succeeded where we failed." And he's talking specifically about our Lenten fast. Our fasts, then, because we follow Jesus, our fasts are a way of entering into communion with Jesus in his fast, because his faithfulness secures our present and future life with God. So that's what we're up to this Lenten season. If you have let go of things, if you are fasting from things, if you are abstaining from things, that's what you're up to. You're not out there trying to get God's attention. You're not out there trying to earn anything, right? And I want to make this absolutely clear this morning. This is as true for us and other Protestants as it is for Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, whose Lent is a little bit different than ours. But I'm not trying to set up a dichotomy between us and Catholics and Orthodox. I'm saying this is what Christians are up to, okay? This is what we are all up to when we participate in Lent. Specifically for us, we're talking about the way of the cross. Josiah, could I get you to go back to the title slide just for a second? Thank you. That's good enough. We're talking about the way of the cross, and I think even just this image helps us to understand a little bit about what that means for us, specifically in this season of Lent. This is the Church of St. George in Ethiopia. It's one of the 11 rock-hewn churches of Ethiopia, which is set up as a kind of Jerusalem in Ethiopia so that Ethiopian Christians could make pilgrimage to Jerusalem, even if they couldn't actually go all the way to Jerusalem. And this is a really interesting church. All the rock-hewn churches, they're created by way of subtraction. You take material away, and you create these structures out of one piece of rock, volcanic rock. This church in particular is interesting because most of the other churches, they're like, it'd be like you come up to the side of a cliff and you carve into the cliff so that you get the structure coming out of the side of the cliff. Maybe you've seen like photographs of Petra in Jordan. That's the same way. This one's different because this one goes top down. And it's the only one of these churches that's cruciform or shaped like a cross. And even the inside of the structure is created by taking away. They went into the rock. This is the way it is for all 11 of these churches. But even the inside is all created out of just one continuous piece of rock. And so it's creation by way of subtraction, which is kind of what Lent is. If you think about laying something down, fasting or abstaining, you are creating by taking something away, even if just for a short time. Another thing that I love about this church is that you might notice you've got all these pilgrims dressed in white around the rim here. In order to get into the courtyards of this church and to enter into it, you have to go down a staircase that's also carved into the rock. You can't quite see it in this picture, but I love the imagery. The way of the cross is down. It's the way of humility. It's the way of giving ourselves over to Jesus. So we have to go down to go into the cross. And that's kind of what we're after in Lent. It's a season of pilgrimage. We're journeying with Jesus. We're seeking to allow his way to be our way. And that's the way of the cross. That's the only way that Jesus travels. Not just during Lent, but at all times. And his invitation to us is to join him on that way. And we have a special way of looking at that today because today is our feast day. You guys know what that means? No? Okay, so let's think about this first. Yeah, Natalie knows what I'm talking about. Jordan already wished me a happy feast day. I've seen some heads nodding. So we don't really do this in Protestant churches and not in evangelical churches because we have churches named like First Baptist Church or First Christian Church or, Resonate Church. I mean, I don't know. There's a Christian comedian who says it's random action verb church, right? Random action verb church. I don't know. I don't want to be too hard on us. But think about Catholic churches or Lutheran churches. They're often named after a saint or a feast or a holiday, right? You get like St. Joseph's Church, you get St. John's Church, St. Mary's Church, Church of the Redeemer, Church of the Cross, these kinds of things. And so when that Saints' Day comes around, or that Holy Cross Day, if our church was Church of the Holy Cross or Cross Church or something like that, that would be our feast day. And the woman at the well doesn't technically have she does on the Eastern Church calendar. Jordan, was it today on the Roman calendar? Was it her feast day today? Or is it just our lectionary? Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, today our gospel reading was the woman at Jacob's well, and that's our church's name. So this is our feast day. And I really want us to lean into it, not because I want, woohoo! I really want us to lean into it, not because I want us to become Catholic. I know that there's like some things that might be confusing that way. We've talked about those things. If you've been around at all, you know why we do things the way that we do. If you don't, you have questions, we can talk about it another time. But I want to lean into our feast day because it gives us like a handhold. Like if you've ever been climbing at a rock gym and you're trying to make your way up the face of the rock, you need to have like finger holds and toe holds. And so it gives us a way of kind of grabbing onto what it means to be Christians in this place at this time by really grounding us in the story of Jesus and the way that we see Jesus at work, not just in the scriptures and not just in the sacraments, but in the lives of people, right? The woman at the well kind of becomes our patron saint in a way. She becomes someone that we look to when we say, what does it look like for us to follow Jesus? Whose example can we look to, right? Because we can follow Jesus. I'm not saying we can't follow Jesus without looking to someone else, but it gives us an example to follow. How do I follow Jesus? Well, I can look at how the woman at the well does it, right? The Eastern Church has even given her a name, and I know that all of this is outside of Scripture, but it's been passed down from really early in church tradition. They named her Saint Fotini, which means light. She is of the light. She's a preacher, right? She returns to her village and she says to the people, look, come and see this guy who's told me everything I've ever done. And they come with her. She's an evangelist. She doesn't just preach, but she preaches the good news, and she's a witness to Jesus. Church tradition also holds that she is martyred for her faith. In the Eastern church tradition, there's this really interesting thing. Anytime someone who's not one of the 12 apostles, apostle is a word that just means sent, somebody who is sent with the good news. And anytime someone is sent to a new people, and that people, some of that people, turns to Jesus, the Eastern Church names that person equal to the apostles. So if you think about, Mary Magdalene, she preaches the resurrection to the 12, and so she gets called equal to the apostles. There are some Slavic saints, Cyril and Methodius, and they created the Cyrillic alphabet that like Russia and Ukraine and other Slavic languages use. They were the first people to preach the good news of Jesus to Slavic people, so they're called equal to the apostles. Saint Fotini is called equal to the apostles because she's the first one to preach to the Samaritans. It is an accident, but it's a happy accident that today is also International Women's Day. International Women's Day, I don't know everything about International Women's Day. We're not celebrating that as a church holiday. But I imagine part of what is going on in International Women's Day is recognizing and lamenting the things that women have had to overcome throughout history, the way that women have been more often subjected to violence and marginalization, as well as celebrating their achievements, the ways that they have advocated and agitated to overcome lives that are given up, given in, being subjected to violence and marginalization. It's a day to celebrate the gifts of women, the graces of women, the accomplishments of women. So on our feast day, so to speak, when our patron, so to speak, the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well, Saint Fotini, is featured in dialogue with Jesus in our gospel reading. Even International Women's Day gives us a way of seeing her story in maybe a new light. Last Sunday, we talked about Jesus and Nicodemus, and Jesus says to Nicodemus, "You must be born again." And Nicodemus has no idea what's going on, right? He's like, "How can I get into my mother's womb and be born again? I'm an old man." And Jesus is like, how can you be a teacher of Israel and not understand what I'm saying to you? This story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, it forms what in iconography is called a diptych. That's where you put two images next to each other so that you can compare and contrast them. And the comparison and the contrasting illuminates something. So you have the story of Nicodemus, Jesus and Nicodemus. You have the story of Jesus and the woman at the well, and they're set up right next to each other in John's gospel. And there are all kinds of comparisons and contrasting contrasts. Let me get my accent on the correct syllable. All kinds of comparisons and contrasts that are set up in order to illuminate something for us so that we can see what Jesus, what God is seeking to say to us through the scriptures, what God is calling us to in the scriptures. So first of all, let's talk about some obvious ones. Nicodemus is a man. The woman at the well is a woman, right? Nicodemus is not just a man, he's a Jewish man. And the woman at the well is not just a woman, she's a Samaritan woman. And we know from this passage that Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. If there's been an update or a recommended update to the translation, that word might be better translated, Jews do not share vessels with Samaritans, right? So this is a way of really zoning in on what's happening here. Jesus should not be sharing a vessel, a bucket, a drinking spoon, or whatever with this woman. But Jews and Samaritans have been at enmity for generations by this point. Jews looked down on Samaritans as, I'm going to have to lean into my Harry Potter metaphors here, right? Half-bloods. They're muggles. They've been polluted with Gentile blood, and they're almost worse than a Gentile because they continue to believe that they are practicing the religion of the Jews, but they've messed it all up according to the Jews. They worship in the wrong place, they worship on the wrong mountain, they worship in the wrong ways. Even their Torah is a little bit different because they've gone back and they've changed the Torah to say that Mount Gerizim, where they have built their temple, that's the right place to worship God. In fact, they've altered the 10 Commandments. If you look at Samaritan Torahs, at the end of their 10 Commandment list in both Exodus and Deuteronomy, they've added specifically Mount Gerizim is where you worship. But let's keep talking through these contrasts, right? Nicodemus, as a Jewish man, he's also learned. He is an elder of the people. He's a member of the Sanhedrin. He's a Pharisee. He is a teacher. He is a leader of the Jews. This Samaritan woman, as a woman in that time, she's probably untaught, illiterate, second-class citizen among second-class citizens. Nicodemus was someone who had power, influence, and authority in his community. The Samaritan woman at the well was likely powerless. Not only because of her gender, but also because of some of the things that Jesus reveals to her that he knows about her. She's had 5 husbands, and the one that she lives with now is not her husband. But there's one more contrast that I want to draw your attention to, and I think that this contrast is the key to understanding the contrast between Nicodemus and the woman at the well. Nicodemus comes to Jesus under the cover of night. And oftentimes that's explained because, like, as a Pharisee, he doesn't want to be seen talking with Jesus. But I think that there's something more symbolic happening there. I think that the night stands in for Nicodemus's ignorance. He does not understand what Jesus is saying to him. And at the end of the conversation, he is still open, he's still searching, he's still leaning in, but he still doesn't get it. In fact, Nicodemus' story is not going to conclude nicely until the end of John's gospel, when he's mentioned as securing a burial place for Jesus with Joseph of Arimathea. By contrast, the woman at the well is there the 6th hour. That's noon. This is middle of the day. The sun does not get any higher. The day does not get any brighter. And I don't think that this means what we have often been led to believe that it means. We've been taught that she goes out during the hottest part of the day so that she doesn't have to interact with other people. But let me just tell you a little story about Jacob at Jacob's well. When Jacob meets Rachel for the first time, this is Old Testament stuff. This is Genesis stuff, right? Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel, who becomes the father of the tribes of Israel, who is like the ancestor par excellence of Israel. He is the one from whom they take their name. The first time that he meets Rachel at this well, and Rachel is the wife that he wants, but not the wife that he gets at first. If you remember the story of Jacob, he goes and he has to work for his uncle Laban for 7 years in order to marry Laban's daughter Rachel, and then when he gets to the wedding, and he's married and it's all official and everything, then he realizes, oh my gosh, this is not Rachel, this is Leah. And he's upset. He goes to Laban, he's like, you tricked me. And Laban's like, you bet your butt I did. I got to get rid of both of these girls. You bet your butt I did. Can we pause for a moment and appreciate my unscripted language? Boy, I sound like a grown-up, don't I? So then Jacob says, look, hey, you promised me Rachel. And Laban's like, yeah, another 7 years and you can have Rachel too. But the first time that Jacob meets Rachel, it's at this well in the middle of the day, noon. I'm not sure that going to get water at the hottest part of the day was really a thing. I don't think it was a time when other people weren't there. If you think about you going through your day, on your lunch hour, that's like you're running into all kinds of people unless you're like me and you just kind of like eat by yourself at your desk. Does anybody else do that? Like a creep? How much more work can I get done while I do this? That makes it sound like I'm trying to convince you that I work really hard all week, but I really only work on Sundays. I don't think it's a thing. I think the light, I think the brightness, I think the middle of the day, I think this is a normal time for people to be out and about their business. Now, she is the only person at the well, but I think that has more to do with Jesus and the encounter that he's having with her than it does with her avoiding the people of the village. Jesus engages her. He speaks to her directly. He crosses all of these boundaries, all of these contrasts that we created, that we noted. We didn't create, we created a list that we noted between Nicodemus and the woman at the well. Those are not just contrasts. Those are like barriers of difference. Like there's someone taking pictures? Or is that just reflection? Flash photography? I don't know what's happening in here. Is everybody okay? All right. All of these things that make it okay for Jesus to be talking with Nicodemus are also reasons that Jesus should not be talking with the Samaritan woman. But Jesus, he transgresses all of those boundaries. He goes right to her, and he engages her in a conversation, and the first thing that he does is ask for her to share her vessel with him. The human God, Jesus in flesh, he thirsts, just like he's going to declare from the cross, I thirst. He desires to be in communion with people. He desires to be with this woman at the well. She says, man, if there's a well that I can go to that'll make it so that I never have to go and get water again, tell me about that well. I want that water. So Jesus tells her to go and get her husband. And this is the part that we focus on that we think brings her so much shame. He says, go and get your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. And he says to her, you're right in saying I have no husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. So what's going on here? We think that this is the source of her shame, that somehow she's an adulteress or a loose woman having had all these husbands, but that's not really the way that things worked in this culture. Right? Women did not have a lot of power in the ancient world, really in any culture, Jewish, Samaritan, Roman, Greek, Persian, Egyptian, Babylonian. It's more likely than not that she's been divorced, that she has been divorced, that the husbands have divorced her, that they've, for any, divorced for any reason. And Moses is like, yeah, for any reason, as long as you give them a certificate of divorce. Maybe this woman, like so many other women in the scriptures, maybe this woman, like Rachel, that Jacob met at this well, maybe this woman is barren. Maybe she can't have children. That would be probably among the top reasons for a husband to divorce his wife in those days. You can't provide me an heir. See you later. The man that she's living with now, or maybe she's had some husbands that have died. People died way earlier in their life than we do today, on average. Shorter life expectancy. No germ theory, no medicine, no hygiene, very little hygiene. So maybe she's been divorced, maybe some husbands have died, and maybe the fact that she's living with a man now means, maybe he's not willing to marry her because of all the social stigma surrounding her, because of all the times that she's been left. Maybe this is as good as she can do for the kind of protection and covering that she needs in that culture. Now, I'm not smart enough to know all this on my own. I want to point out that I learned most of this from a female scholar of the New Testament named Lynn Cohick, who herself, while teaching in Africa at a Christian college, observed some of the Kenyan women in the neighborhood that she lived with, and she saw some of these same dynamics at play in their lives, which made her go back and reconsider, maybe I don't really know what's happening in the story of the woman at the well. Something really special is happening here in this encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. Now, because we've been led to believe that she's ashamed, that she's this kind of loose woman with all of this shame connected to her, we have been led to believe that when Jesus confronts her about these men, that she's deflecting, that she's trying to change the conversation when she says, oh, I see that you're a prophet. Let me ask you about where we're supposed to worship. She's not deflecting. Jesus has told her something about her life that there's no way that he could have known. She realizes he's a prophet. The Samaritans, just like the Jews, have been waiting for a prophet, someone to come and make things right. So she hears that this man who is encountering her the same way that Father Jacob encountered Rachel, in the same place, and he knows something about her that he could not know, and he's this outsider to her community, this Jewish man who looks down on her. He's asking to share a drinking utensil. He's talking with her about her life. And she says, are you the prophet? Are you the one that we've been waiting for? Where are we supposed to worship? Is it here or is it in Jerusalem? She's ready. The reason that this is happening in broad daylight as opposed to night is because she is ready. Jesus says, you must be born again. And Nicodemus goes, how do I get back inside my mother's womb? And Jesus says to this woman, something about herself, and she says, I'm ready. I'm open. I want to learn. Tell me what it is. Nicodemus says, how? And this woman says, let's talk. You want to talk about a patron saint. You want to talk about someone that I want to follow, whose example I want to emulate as they follow Jesus. When someone says something to me like that, I want to lean in. I don't want to be bewildered. I don't want to think that I'm smarter than. I don't want to keep people at arm's length. I want to lean in and say, let's talk. If Jesus is in the vicinity, I want to hear what he has to say. And then think about who misunderstands in this passage. The disciples have been with Jesus. We don't know how long. The timeline in John is different than the timeline in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We don't know how long they've been with Jesus at this point. But boy, they do what the disciples do really well, and they misunderstand. Jesus is like, the whole time. I don't know if you heard Dylan reading the disciples' parts, but he's like, did he get some food somewhere? Who fed him? What's going on? How do we help? What do we do? What are you doing, Jesus? But the woman understands. She leaves the jar. That's significant. She brought, this is likely the one thing that she has to get water out of the well with. Every family would need one of these things. Every family would depend on having one of these things. We don't know, we don't know if she's poor, if she's rich, if she could get a new one, if she could make a new one. We don't know, but it's significant that she leaves it there. This is a means of providing sustenance for herself, the man that she lives with, the livestock that they own. She leaves it there because Jesus asked to share it with her. She leaves it there. And she goes back to the village. The disciples, they're like, what's going on? Why are you doing this? Do you need some food? Who got him food? Has he already eaten? But the woman, she goes back to the village and she says, you got to come see this guy. He told me everything I've ever done. And again, we interpret that as like all these shameful things. It could just as easily be interpreted. He's told me about everything that's ever happened in my life. He's told me about all the things that were done to me. He knows. I think the Messiah is here. And here's another hint that maybe this woman is not as disreputable as we've been led to believe. If she were a woman who nobody in the community could trust, they're not coming with her. Right? If she's a woman of ill repute, if she's a woman of low character, if she's someone who could easily be believed to be a liar, nobody's coming with her. The whole village comes with her. And many Samaritans believe because of the woman's testimony, because of what she says. She leads them to Jesus, right? And here's the thing. The whole thing starts with, if you knew who was asking you for a drink, you'd be asking me for living water. She leaves that jar right there because she knows that that water is not going to satisfy. Can we get the art up here, Josiah? Thank you, sir. This is an early 4th century fresco from the catacombs in Rome. Now, what you need to know is that the 4th century is really when Christians finally start using the cross widely. Now, it had been used a little bit before, but mostly it had been used to mock Christians. There's a piece of graffiti from the 3rd century called Alexamenos Worships His God. It's a man on a cross with a donkey's head. And some guy named Alexamenos worshiping him. This is what the Romans thought of Christians. You worship an ass, pardon my language. It isn't until Constantine makes Christianity legal that the cross becomes an acceptable way of kind of turning these things upside down. So what are the images that are used at first? Well, you have Jesus as the Good Shepherd. You have Jesus turning the water to wine at the wedding in Cana. You have Jesus and the woman at the well. These are the images that Christians are using at first to talk about who Jesus is and what it means to be saved. Look, you'll notice that this well is shaped like one of those jars at the wedding in Cana where Jesus turned the water into wine. Jesus meets this woman at the well. She leaves that vessel. She leaves it there because she knows now where the living water is. There's no doubt about it. So Nicodemus, who has no idea what it means to be born again, when Jesus says, truly, truly, I tell you, you must be born of water and the Spirit, she's born of the water and the Spirit. She understands now, and she goes and she tells everyone. She tells everyone. And they come, and they believe, and they are born again. And because, here's the thing about Saint Fotini. If we're willing to use that name for her. She's not talked about again in Scripture. I'm not intimately familiar with the tradition about her, but I imagine that she's believed to be a martyr, whether we actually have that information or not, because she's willing to go the way of the cross. She's willing to lay her life down. She's willing to leave the jar behind. She knows where the living water is, and she's going to go after it no matter what it costs her. The reason that we have saints in the church is not because Jesus is not enough. That's never been true. The reason that we have saints in the church is first because Paul, when he's writing to the churches, he calls everybody who believes in Jesus a saint. So that's all of us. But the reason that we talk about saints and sainthood in the church is because there are people among us whose witness to Jesus becomes exemplary. The way that they are willing to follow him, the way that they're willing to give themselves over to him, the way that they are willing to walk the way of the cross becomes an invitation to us that we might understand in our own time and in our own place how to follow Jesus. When things are good, when things are bad, when things are hard, when things are easy, in those moments where it doesn't seem to cost us anything to be a Christian, and in those moments where it seems like it's going to cost us everything. Our reputation, our very life. I'm going to end the sermon with this. I think I've shared this before, and it's a point of embarrassment for me now, but when I first came to Jacob's Well, I was not thrilled about the name of the church. I didn't like it. I don't know why. It's kind of a mouthful, Jacob's Well. And then if you smush the words together, like on our sign out front, it looks like Jacob's Swell. And it's like, well, I'm glad that Jacob's well. I'm glad he's doing well. Someone asked me, there was a young man caught in the thunderstorm on Thursday, and he was out here by the power pole, and he was crouching down underneath an umbrella, and it's like lightning and everything out there, and I'm like, do you need a ride? And he's like, are you Jacob? I was like, and I was like, no, I'm Scott. Sorry for the letdown. And I tried to give him a ride. He just said, I just need shelter. And I said, go get underneath the awning there and just wait for it to let up so that you can go where you need to go. I was not thrilled about the name. But I'll tell you now, I could not be prouder to be part of a church that's named after the place of encounter between Jesus and this woman. This woman I don't even know what to say about her. On International Women's Day, she overcomes all of these odds, all of these things that women have been up against for all of history. And she still follows Jesus. I want to be like that. I want to say, I don't know what I'm up against. I don't know what it's going to take to overcome it. But I want to follow Jesus anyway. Maybe following Jesus is going to get me out of some of these things, but maybe not. The reason that I am so moved by this gospel passage, by the witness of this woman, is because she, before any of the 12 are ready, before Nicodemus is ready, before almost anyone else in the Gospel of John is ready, she is ready to follow the way of the cross. And I want to be like that. I pray that being part of this church does make me like that. And if that's what you want for your life too, that's my prayer for you. Let's pray.